Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. As many of you know, if you've been following my show for a while, I really believe in the power of personal connections and networking, and I think it's critically important. I actually did three-quarters of a doctorate in business on social capital, which is sort of an academic term for networking. And I ran across some friends of mine who have actually written a book and have been very successful in this publishing called The Ripple Effect. And it's all about the power of networking, the power of connections. And I thought it'd be great to have them on talking about their book, talking about why they wrote it, talking about the message that it tries to make. Because I think that, after COVID and too many of these conversations that we're having virtually, some of us have forgotten about the power of connection. Maybe not the best guy to quote, but I remember Woody Allen at one point had said 80% of life is just showing up. And I think just showing up and making those connections at events is so critically important. So I want to introduce you to David Tabucchi and Mark Keeley. David Tabucchi is an author. He's a former politician. He's a regulatory and integrity commissioner. He's got a law degree from Osgood. And he was a cabinet minister in the Mike Harris government from, what was it,
1995 to 2003. I spanned both Mike and Ernie Eves.
That's a long time to be in cabinet. Congratulations, sir.
Yeah, I had 5 different portfolios, so I couldn't hold down a job.
And Mark Keeley also can't hold down a job because he's got an incredibly interesting background with Atomic Energy of Canada and also running Keeley and Associates, a public relations, government affairs, government relations company. And he's been on my show before. He's an active political person, commentator. And I don't think you actually do polling, but you actually interpret a lot of polling. And you've been excellent in that regard. And so, Mark, thank you for joining me. So,
Brian.
Mark and David, why did you write the book?
Well, you want me to start, Mark?
David?
Yeah, so I lecture at York University once a year on diversity to a class of about, a couple of hundred kids. And they kind of represent the, what Ontario looks like to everyone else. And after I give the lecture, I usually get about 12 really enthusiastic students that come up afterwards and ask you more questions. But they never ask me about what I'm lecturing about. Almost all of them ask me, how do they get to where I am today? And you mentioned something really interesting, Brian, that, a lot of us grew up having to learn these social skills. But this new generation, because of technology and phones, they haven't gone through the same type of learning of social skills that we used to do. And so, as Mark and I were talking about this, and Mark and I are old friends, and Mark describes us as the odd couple because he is a former senior advisor, John Turner, and I was a Mike Harris cabinet minister. But you should tell the story of how we met.
Well, it's funny, Brian. The odd couple is great, but I also think because we got great Asia experience, I like to refer to it as yin and yang. I'm sitting at my office at Atomic Energy of Canada, like you had suggested at the outset, Brian. My phone rings. This is in 2000. And my secretary says, "Oh, it's the minister on the phone." I go, "What?" So David gets on the phone and he says to me, "Mark, there's this person I want you to hire." And he went on this diatribe about why I should hire this person. And it was a very, very effusive, introduction to this guy. And I did finally listen. I talked to him and I interviewed him and we hired him. And that guy's gone on to a major role in the United Nations in Europe right now, based on what David's recommendation was. And that sort of started a relationship with us. I will say this, though, Brian, and this is an interesting thing, too. When I worked for Mr. Turner, he was always very mindful of people who we had to be on a watch out for. In '88, just after the election, he said, "Hey, there's a guy I want you to keep an eye on. His name is David Tabucchi. He's a counselor in Markham. Just keep an eye on this guy." So it was the first time that I ever really engaged with a guy like David Tabucchi. And then around 2003, 2004, I'm at Queen's Park, and there's David sitting at 900 Bay in the thing. So I walked over to him. "David, Mark Keeley." We hadn't seen each other for 3 or 4 years. And that sort of started everything I'd like to think on an uphill and really effective relationship over the last 25 years. David and I have traveled many, many places throughout the world and done an awful lot of business together. So I just think this book is really, in my opinion, it's a labor of love, and he's a great guy.
So, David,
That feeling's mutual.
David, you talked about this generation not having the social skills or being developed the social skills. Actually, I've talked to a lot of people that have just recently graduated high school or recently graduated universities. And I guess, some of us probably don't recognize how damaging COVID was to them. And it was, they went through all of high school without clubs, without teams, without students council, without that interaction, or they went through university, even worse, I think, without the opportunity to go to residence and frats and sororities and meet people. I think that some of us that had those opportunities and remember how fondly. It was interesting. I was at an event recently where everyone was talking about their best jobs, their favorite jobs. And almost everyone mentioned one of those summer jobs they had at high school, or even more so at university. That those times that we had during high school or university end up being critically important in our developing our abilities to connect with people and learn how to connect with people. And we went, what was it, 3 years?
Yeah.
Socially distancing, staying at home, not being at high school, not being at university. So how do you teach that after you've missed out on that opportunity?
Yeah, and one of the things that we thought about this book was, and Mark and I know a lot of people, so I said, why don't we call our bunch of our friends who started with nothing, made something with their lives, and tell stories, because we all give speeches. You have, Mark has, I have a lot, and what do people remember after you give a speech? It's not necessarily the material you want to convey, but it's the stories you tell during the speech. And so, and as it turned out, Brian, um, just amazingly so, that four of the writers are East Asian, one South Asian, two Black, one Indigenous, and many, many women. All groups that have difficulty networking. And like, when I grew up in a different era than well, I'm older than you too. And after the war in the 50s and 60s, everyone hated the Japanese Canadians because of the war. And of course, the government had taken everything from us, so we were very poor. And so we had no role models to look at. There were not a lot of visible minorities in Canada in the 50s and 60s. And so you couldn't point to someone who was a Japanese Canadian who was successful. There were none. In fact, the only politician that I knew of during that era was Ying Hope, who was in Toronto Council. And so we thought, talking to these kids too these days, I talk to a lot of them, is that it's good for them to have people to look at and say, look, at this person looks like me, he's gone through the same kind of thing as me. If they can do it, maybe I can do it. I look back and we were just I was just over at the Duke of Edinburgh's organization for emerging young leaders from the Caribbean and chatting there with them. And Wes Hall was there too. And Wes was speaking just before me. He's a great speaker. He's a hard guy to follow. But he got up there and he said, is anyone here from Scarborough? And you may know this, as many people do. Wes grew up, in the projects in Scarborough. He had nothing. He started out in a mail room at a firm. And of course, I'm sitting next to our mutual friend, Murray Simpson, who you know. And Murray, of course, he's a Métis. He started off in Scarborough in assisted housing and made something of his life. And of course, I lived in Scarborough and I'm Japanese Canadian. And so it was a different world because we had no role models, any of us. Now, I think these kids need not only role models, they need mentors as well. And that's kind of the message out of this thing. Like, if you see
Mentors and role models.
Yep. Sorry?
Mentors and role models.
Absolutely. And if you look at the commonality in the book, everyone, it's your network is about quality, not quantity. It's kind of like when you say to organizations, and because you've gone through all kinds of, governance, training too, that it's about the culture of the organization. It's also about the culture of your network. Are they happy for you when you succeed? I mean, everyone's on your side when you're down, but are they happy when you succeed? Not saying, well, it should be me. What can I get out of this? And you kind of grow together.
Mark, why'd you participate in the writing of the book?
Well, and I think David gave a very interesting and a pithy sort of an essence about why we did this, but we didn't want to because we did realize, both of us have these fantastic networks. We've got both blue and red background, if you could imagine that political spectrum. So there's some very active opportunities to showcase that. But one of the things that we did decide to do is not a how-to book, because people are saying you guys got to write a book on what you have here. And we thought this is a huge opportunity to tell stories, as David said. So when we talked about who we wanted to see, we had thought originally, well, we could write this book, but then we thought, nope, it's a good idea to get storytellers with us. So as editors of this book, and as the thought behind this book, we thought let's choose who we want on this. And the folks that we did choose, much like David had suggested, had those kind of attributes. Brian, what I wanted to raise was this. This is not a how-to. Everybody writes how-to books. Here's the best way you can network, and here's what you got to do. Oh, and here's an equation on how that works. But it was really interesting because of all of the authors, there were some trends that we saw in every single one of them. Every single one of them is a high performer. And you could tell by their stories the trends that makes them high performers. Every single one of them owns their own outcome. That was a very actively interesting trend that we saw. They all have, and David and I agree with this 100%. They all have what we believe is a humility, and that's an important feature to have. More important, they've all got this. And you'll see this in the book too. They've all got a boldness. And they've got a discipline, and they've got a focus, and they've even got a focus for the future, Brian, which is very interesting. What we thought too, in terms of a trend, was adaptability. And if you read the stories of all of these people, like David had said, there's such a diverse group of people that adaptability and resilience is part of their high-performing matrix. The three other issues that I think were very clear that we saw was they all have curiosity, which is so important in today's time. They have a considered perspective on things. And what we saw in every single author was a sense of resilience. That's how you leverage your positive value. And you could see that in the book. We're astounded. And I got to tell you, Brian, ECW Press took a flyer on David and I. And it's really worked, and we're so grateful to the Canadian publishing industry, particularly ECW Press, for doing this, and we're so grateful for Canadians to embracing this kind of a project, if you will, and that's what's making us so happy that books are flying out of bookstores right now.
Remind us the name of the book and where can people get it?
Right here, it's called The Ripple Effect. And you can get it at any Indigo stores, online, Amazon, and there's multiple. You go online, there's multiple stores.
The Ripple Effect. David Tabucci, Mark Keeley, and numerous other authors. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with you in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got two really incredible gentlemen with me tonight that I've admired over the years. David Tabucci, who is a lawyer, former cabinet minister, for what was it, over a decade in total with Mike Harris and Ernie?
It's 8 years as a provincial politician and 6 years as the municipal councillor in Markham.
And also you've been a lawyer, you've been a regulatory person, and now you're an academic?
Well, not really. I sit on a bunch of boards, and I like to write books. So apparently my nonfiction books do better than my sci-fi books. So there you go.
Fantastic.
But you do lecture, David, and I think that's where
I actually lecture twice a year at the Directors College on McMaster, and once a year at York University on diversity.
Excellent. And Mark Keeley, who is a liberal. David Tabucci is a conservative. Mark Keeley is a liberal activist. Actually, you worked on Parliament Hill for Prime Minister John Turner. Is that not correct?
Yes. For 6 years, yes.
What an incredible experience that would have been. And now runs a government affairs, government relations consulting company. Mark, I'm going to ask you, and maybe you could tell us a story, but John Turner was known as an incredible charismatic networker, someone that would look at you, they would say with his big blue eyes and a big firm handshake, and you'd be bowled over. Is that important in networking?
Oh, Brian, it's yes, it's important, and the beauty of a guy like Turner was he would meet you and he would remember your name. And there are so many countless stories. I traveled with him everywhere across Canada, and we would go to, Regina, for example, and he'd see somebody at an event and say, "Oh, hi, Bill," and he hadn't seen Bill for 15 or 17 years. So that's how effective that powerful relationship or the bond is. Turner had probably, in my opinion, and David would agree because he was good friends with him as well. Turner had a curiosity, and that was, I think, what really was his leverage point, because he was always interested in what other people thought and how that that sort of framed his perspective on things about Canada. Just a wonderful, very, very well networked person, and he really focused on his network, Brian. And that's what we brought that to the book as well. I learned a lot from Turner on that, and David's very good at this as well.
One of the things that Brian Mulroney did, another former prime minister, is he had a call list such that if he had dead time or time between meetings, he would just remind himself as the people he needed to reach out and connect with. Is that something that either of you have seen done well?
Well, we both do that. But David is very good at picking up the phone and calling just to say, thank you to somebody or to send a note. So I'm talking for him, but I know that because I've experienced this with David over the last 25 years, that he's very good at the follow through. He's very good at to ensure that the network is in the other person's favor, not his. For both of us, ego is not a big issue. It's loyalty, it's those kinds of issues that we talked about earlier on, and that's what both of us have in spades, I believe.
David,
Brian,
can you share with us
yeah,
one of your stories of that you may have put in the book?
sure. And the commonality I also found, which is it surprises people because all these folks come from different industries too. I mean, the only other politician here is Mitzi, right? Mitzi Hunter, who was a cabinet minister under Kathleen Wynne, but they come from marketing, from education, from healthcare, from technology. It just spans all kinds of different industries, which I always found was interesting. But you look at these folks, and what surprises people, because all of them are really good storytellers, all of them are really tremendous networkers, is almost all of them will tell you in their stories that they started out as introverts and still have that introvert gene in them. Like, when I was a kid, you know, I couldn't talk to more than one person at a time without looking at my shoes. And back in my day, we used to give something called an oral composition. You'd pick a topic out of a hat in grade 7 and have to give a speech. And I got baseball. I said, I know baseball, but I couldn't. I just mumbled. And the teacher took sympathy on me and gave me 51% just to pass me. And so many of us started that way. It's just funny how we sort of evolved into this networking thing. And when Mark was talking about John Turner, I mean, you met John Turner, and I mean, you met John Turner. He looked at you, he knew who you were. He had a brilliant smile, tremendous speaker. I mean, Brian was the same way. Brian Mulroney was one of the best speakers I ever heard, but he had that that level of comfort when you met him. And so, you know, many of us have to learn these things because many of us, I mean, one of the toughest things to do, I mean, after death, after giving a speech, is going up and meeting somebody you don't know, and so that's why these stories are important. And I'm no different. I mean, look at, I was extremely shy. I just couldn't do it.
But how'd you get over it? You're, a successful politician. You spent time on town council, and then as a politician provincially. How do you get over being an introvert and get out and shake hands and knock on doors and make speeches? How do you do that?
Well, I guess the big thing, when I went to high school, I was like 12 years old. I was accelerated through school too, so I was always the youngest, smallest kid around. So you got nothing. You're the only visible minority in high school, and you're the youngest kid. So you're not exactly fitting in the social caste system of high school. But luckily, I got my growth spurt between grade 9 and grade 10. I'm not exactly the biggest guy in the world. I didn't get the big genes like my brother. My brother's 6'1" and 215, and actually he was, got a hockey scholarship. And actually, he was the first Japanese Canadian drafted by the NHL in 1975 by the Penguins. My
Fantastic.
brother. Yeah, but I got my growth spurt. I was a decent athlete. So I was running back on the football team. I wrestled. I was the gymnastics champion of Scarborough and stuff like that. That elevates you in status, in high school status. So that gave me a little more confidence. And one day, a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, he signed us up for variety night, and we're going to go on the stage and sing and play our guitars." So once you go on the stage and sing and play your guitars, speaking to people becomes a little bit easier. So that's kind of how I magically transformed. But that's also how I learned how to network, because I was also a band geek. I was the first clarinet and president of the band, and I got good marks. So I was with the Brains. So the Brains, the band kids, and the jocks all started asking me to do these social things with them. And I thought, well, that's how you network. That's why I figured that one out.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I was academically pretty good in
Well,
school.
that doesn't surprise me. Geez, I've seen you in some
But
conference with me.
the sort of the guys that had the status in my high school were the hockey players. And I couldn't skate well, so I was house league, but I didn't skate well, so I wasn't, I didn't have that status. And in grade 8, I won a whole bunch of cross country meets, and I actually got the award at the end of grade 8 for male athlete of the year. And I thought,
Wow, that's
hey,
great,
that'd be
Brian.
cool.
Yeah.
And the football players and the hockey players were going, cross country? What the blank is cross country? Like, that's nothing, nothing. But the next year I tried out for and made the team as a running back on the football team because I was fast. And then I became successful within football and then rugby. And it was then they could pay some attention to me and did pay some attention to me. So
I gotta
I think
interrupt you.
actually,
Yeah.
bridging the gaps between the
Yeah.
different social circles
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
is important.
Yeah.
And for me, no one respected my academic achievements. No one respected my cross country achievements. But football and rugby, when I could tackle and hit and run and score touchdowns, that's when it worked.
I got to tell you this, Brian, because I was too small to play football in grade 9. I ran cross country. And actually, I was pretty fast too. I used to run for the Scarborough Lions track and field club, and I was actually a ranked sprinter. But then I played football, and exactly what you said. In my era, football was the glamorous sport, and all of a sudden you're a cool kid, right?
Okay.
I get you. Smart didn't matter, but the
Mark-
cool did.
Mark, Mark, tell us one of your stories, sir.
So I was an athlete throughout high school and university. So but the reason I think it's important is because it does teach you to be social and to be gracious as
I think
well.
team sports are so critically important for development.
But, David and I have always talked about this, Brian, and the one thing that binds us together is politics. And you too, Brian. I've known you for years, and you're very considered about things political. Not necessarily it doesn't matter what side you're on, but you understand it. And we believe, and one of the things we tried to get out in the book was that there are things that you should do. Obviously, playing a team sport, whatever that is, it even could be a debating team. But the point of the exercise is politics, in our considered opinion, was the area where people get to lose their ego, as it were, or to show their brains off on another perspective. And that's the way we believe that people today, young people particularly, could really hone those networking skills. You meet somebody in a campaign, they could be your friend for life. It's one of those things that politics really does make strange bedfellows, as it were. And we've seen that in the book, that almost all of us in the book have some instance where politics has played a part in their life.
David, is that true today? I think a generation ago, Mark's right, and I had and all of you guys, you too, are a great example of friendships across the aisle. My sense is that politics has become so partisan and so extreme today that people on the different sides of the aisle just don't sit down and get to know each other anymore.
And you're absolutely right, because in my era, we had dealt with the issues, but we didn't have social media then either. So that kind of accelerated this whole polarization extremists in politics. So I've got friends that are liberals. I look at I'm a red Tory, Mark's a blue liberal. That's why we're friends. We're both in the middle, and almost everybody knows in the middle those days. I mean, even back when I was in politics, one of for example, an NDP member would come up to me after question period and ask me to help him do something. I would help them to do something because in question period it's all showtime, right? But we were able to maintain at least some relationships then. Today it's almost impossible. But getting to Mark's point though is this, Mark, is this Brian? If I always say to these kids, how do you get beyond you're ambitious, you want to meet people, you get involved with politics as a volunteer. There's a lot of important people that are volunteering in politics who you get to meet well beyond your pay grade, but they see you as an equal then. They see you as someone else as a volunteer. You're not after something with them. Maybe one day when you need to have help with something, who knows, maybe a word to somebody else, they will help you because they know who you are differently. And that allowed, when I graduated from law school, I mean, geez, I couldn't get an interview. There weren't a lot of us minorities in law in those days. It's actually the 50th anniversary of my law school graduation coming up. I couldn't get interviews. I couldn't get a job. Ironically, after I left politics, after having some pretty important portfolios, all the big law firms that would not give me an interview when I graduated from law school wanted me to work for them, to do some rainmaking for them, right? And so it was a different world back then. It was a hard scrabbling world, and we had no one to help us. But politics, when I started a law firm, I mean, I had no clients. My only employee was my aunt, who worked for me for nothing. And I got involved somehow with politics, and all of a sudden I met everyone who was important in Markham, and that kind of helped me with my business. So, again, it's a means, but you got to be sincere. I don't care if you're joining the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. Be sincere about what you're going to work for, but it's an opportunity for your network well beyond your ability to do it as an individual.
I agree with that. I also think that it's often an opportunity to get really a more senior responsibility than you would in a lot of other avenues where young people can end up being, assistant to John Turner or
Right.
in 1981. I was given the post of youth chairman for the David Peterson leadership campaign when David Peterson was running for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. And number one, it was a great experience, an incredible opportunity to work with the campaign team. 17 years later, David Peterson was the most important recommender for me to get a job that I wanted. 17 years later. And so, I met the man. I had a great experience working for him. And almost 2 decades later, he still remembered me and called me up and asked me to meet a guy, Jim Pattison, that was looking for someone with my skill base and effectively ended up being the key guy that helped me get that job. So those connections end up being critically important. And whether it's role models or mentorship or, just getting to know people.
I wanted to raise this point too, Brian.
Yeah,
I think it's just based on what you asked earlier on. Today politics is very polarized. You're absolutely right. We know people who are conservatives that have no other friends except in the Conservative Party. The same thing with people who are in the Liberal or the New Democrat Party. But my point on this is, and maybe it's our humble attempt at trying to mitigate a lot of that polarization through this book. And if you could, one of the things that David and I have done is, for all intents and purposes, we say, let's marry those networks we have, Mark. And so if I know somebody that could be helped here, or you know somebody that could be helped there, let's collectively use our networks. And really, the book showcases that in such an effective way.
We're going to have to take a break for some messages. We're chatting with Mark Keeley and David Tabucci tonight about The Ripple Effect, a book that is all about stories from them and several other authors about networking, about connections, about building personal relationships, and stories, not just a how-to book, but stories about how that's worked for them. And hopefully you'll learn from that what you got to do. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. It's a real pleasure of mine to be chatting tonight with David Tabucci. I understand now with the new rules, you get to be called honorable forever. So the Honorable David Tabucci, I think that's the new rule. Cabinet ministers get that title, and they get to have it forever. So thank you, sir, for joining me. And Mark Keeley, what do I get to call you? Key man to the Prime Minister forever, because you were, I think, one of the key people. And one of the things I always admired about you, Mark, is that you were there at the beginning with John Turner, but every single time I saw John Turner at any event, former prime minister in a wheelchair and stuff, you were at his side. And so
Thanks,
your
Brian.
connection to that gentleman was very long and obviously very personal.
Thanks,
I
Brian.
wonder
I
if
will say this. I knew Turner probably better than anybody in this country. He loved the heck out of David Tabucci, and he really liked you, Brian. So I remember we bumped into you at some event. I think it was in Ottawa at one point, and he said, "Oh, that's Brian Crombie." He remembered. It was just
that's very kind of you.
it was nice.
Um, you guys have talked stories. Can you share any of the stories that other people, any of the other authors spoke about, talked about, wrote about in the book?
Well, let me start, Mark. I just want to. Do you know Young Woo? Young Woo,
I don't.
the former CEO of the Mars Discovery District, successful serial entrepreneur in technology, a leader in diversity, just a wonderful guy. And here's a guy he's Chinese, I'm Japanese. I'm a little older than him. He grew up in Quebec. And when we started exchanging stories, and he's on the board with the OMERS Pension Fund with me, and we started talking, and we had such parallels in our growing up that, I mean, when we grew up, because of bigotry and stuff, we both were called chinks and Japs and stuff like that. We both went through the bullying stuff and being social outcasts. And here's a guy who just overcame all this stuff, and so he's like my brother now. I just love Young, but he in his chapter, he had a phrase he uses all the time. It's NFQ, and that stands for never fucking quit. And so the publisher didn't want to put that in there because it's because this book's being distributed in the United States by Simon and Schuster, and some of the states don't like that kind of language, but that really defines who he is, and who almost everybody who writes the story has. It's about perseverance. Mark said this earlier on. It's never giving up, despite all the doors that are closed in front of you. Never give up with these things, and the other thing that Young always said that really rang a bell with me, that he said, trusted relationships are earned. And it gets back to what I said earlier on. It's about the quality of your circle of network. And it's about the trust. Because if you don't trust your folks that are within your circle, then you're doomed. And that trust has to be both ways.
Trust is so critically important. There's no question about that. Mark, what about you? You got any stories?
I have three examples of contributors to our book, Brian. One of them was Baron Minette. He's a very well-known public relations guy in this country, and actually, he's leading the charge with us on the book about trying to get us into mainstream media, et cetera, et cetera. He's just been a marvelous contributor, and in his chapter, I'll just paraphrase it. He talks about value. And he says value isn't what you bring, it's how you position your value. And he was really clear in terms of how you position your value. Because, oftentimes people are so overt. He uses the phrase a lot of givers and takers, and he is no taker, that's for sure. You could see that throughout his entire chapter. It's really, really well done that way. The second person, and I just love her, and you know her too, Brian. She's just so well known in Canada for what she did in the oil and gas sector, and that's Susan Murray. Susan is a huge conservative, but she's been so adaptable in making sure that she transcends politics. One thing that was really remarkable about her chapter is it's just her. She talks about ego and how ego oftentimes kills what she calls leverage. And so she talks about, no one is irreplaceable. And she was always says that, don't look like you want the prize, act like you're a partner in that. And so she talks about the value of partnership and how that transcends any kind of ego. But last, and I think this is an important one too, because leverage is sort of a common theme in the book. Tabucchi talks about this in his chapter when he says everybody has leverage. I'm just paraphrasing again, but he talks about swagger and thinking that your resume and your and your everything speaks for itself. It's not true. His in David's chapter, he talks about alignment and perspective. And those two things really do add to the effectiveness of being a good networker for success.
What did you think? What do you mean by alignment and perspective, David?
Oh, geez, I never had that perspective put that way.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean perspective. I am preparation. I'm sorry.
Preparation.
David's very
Preparation.
prepared.
Yeah, well, that's a common theme in a lot of things because a lot of I'm trying to think of who was really talking about the preparation part of things. I
I
can't
got to tell
remember
you
who.
guys, I had an amazing time Saturday this past week. I went to see Barry Manilow.
Wow.
And he was amazing. But then halfway through, or three-quarters of the way through, he said, "You know what? I grew up in Brooklyn, in the tough part of Brooklyn, Williamsburg, I think it was, which at the time in I guess the 60s and 70s was really a tough neighborhood. It's gentrified of late." And he said because he was not athletic, he was slight, and he showed a picture of him, and he was very slight. He was ridiculed. He was called, negative names because he sort of looked effeminate, and he didn't play sports in a very tough Italian immigrant neighborhood, and and a lot of the things that you guys talked about, he talked about. So he was very resilient and persistent. He kept on trying to play his music. He ended up being head of the band in high school. He ended up going into Times Square and singing in a little place where you'd record radios in Times Square, and got on the radio and got something. And then ultimately he went to Juilliard School. And, all of his buddies thought, my gosh, this guy that we made fun of, who ended up being head of the band and this somewhat musician playing piano almost everywhere. And he talked about how he'd play piano anywhere anyone would have him. And he actually ended up writing a bunch of jingles for advertisements, and people would become, known. They would know him because of his jingles that he would write. And then he finally got a self-performance at Carnegie Hall. And he invited all of his former friends from high school to his performance in Carnegie Hall. And, it's the stories about what you talked about, finding your spot and being persistent about that, about being resilient, about, trying to, show up in your area of expertise, and combat those naysayers, those critics, those bullies. And 80 years old, he rocked it, guys. He rocked
Wow,
it. It was
that's
amazing.
great, Brian. Where was that? In Toronto?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I just remembered who I was thinking about the preparation part of things. Our friend Frank Garrentser. Frank is I guess the founder of the largest string of private colleges in the country, and Traus. And Frank's an interesting guy. He's a Hungarian, and his father passed away when he was, I think, 14, and he took over the hardware store for the family at the age of 14, and got involved with technology and all kinds of things. But Frank always, his big shtick is he liked to go to random events and meet random people. But it didn't mean he just wandered in. He prepared for it. So if he was going to something on post-secondary education, he'd know exactly what he's talking about, because his strategy all the time was, when the question period came up after whoever the speakers were speaking, he always wanted to go second. I don't know why he was second, but he always wanted to go second. But he always wanted to ask a question. And then that question would lead him to the opportunity to meet the person later on who he was asking the question of. Actually, that's how I met him. I had no idea who Frank was. And then I was speaking at some forum for post-secondary education, and he asked me a question, and he can't remember the question, neither can I. But as a result of that, afterwards, he came up to me and wanted to chat, and then eventually asked me to go be an advisor on one of his advisory committee. And actually, I'm still on the advisory committee for him right now. But it's the other thing about this is whether it's him, whether it's anybody, Murray, any of the folks in there, they always say take a risk, do something. You have to take a chance and do these things, and that's where people don't often do that. And Mark and I talk about this all the time. I mean, my I think it was John Turner said that to you, but my dad said it to me. Never turn down an opportunity, and sometimes you got to learn on the job. You take a risk by doing it, but in some opportunities, I probably, like, looking back, I shouldn't have taken. But it gives you an opportunity to do things that you may not have ever thought you could do.
I was chatting with this priest who was the guy that took the Archbishop of Toronto and the Catholic Church around for all of his different speaking events once. And I chatted with him. I said, what do you do? You're the advanced person for the Archbishop. And he said, one of the things that the Archbishop always does, and I do as well, is when I go into a hall, I always go talk to the person that's standing alone. Not always to the popular people that have got a bunch of people around them, because I know what they're going to say. And I probably already met them. But if there's a person standing alone, that's the person I go chat with, because the collision, the connection with that person will always produce an interesting story and an interesting connection. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
That's part of my advice in my chapter. I actually said that, Brian. Right on.
The other things that he said were kind of interesting. He says that the Archbishop always found a spot where he could sit either, on the center of an aisle so you could be seen, or up a little bit higher so you could be seen. He always found the youngest person and the oldest person in the audience and recognized them. And that he tried to make personal connections with a few people, because once you make personal connections with a few people, everyone feels like you've made a connection with the crowd. He had some great suggestions. Mark, any other comments from you about...
I will say this, and we've been astounded by the reception we're getting about the book, Brian. We're doing an awful lot of these kinds of things, podcasts or public events or even signing events, Brian. So we're just astounded by that. But one of the things that I'm very interested, two things really captured my interest and sort of were surprising to me. One is there's no set demographic of anybody who really wants to read this book. It transcends young people all the way to people well into their 80s. I was in China when our book was finally finished, and the editor sent it, or the publisher sent it to David and I had it in China. And so I was reviewing it, and people said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I wrote this book with this guy, David Tabucchi, and here's our book." People in China were saying, we need a book like this in China. So we've been thinking long and hard about, other places where this book that could reflect the country or the place where it would make sense. And right now, this book is in print in India, it's in print in Norway, it's in print in Canada, the United States, and we're looking at other jurisdictions. China, for example, Latin America, and even African nations are interested.
Oh, I got to send you. I did a chapter as part of my doctorate in business on guanxi, which is the Chinese concept of networking, and I compared guanxi to networking. So I'll send it to you.
Well, not only that, David, maybe Brian will include that in our next book when it gets into China.
The Ripple Effect. David Tabucchi, Mark Keeley, and numerous other authors. It's available in bookstores and online, Amazon, etc. You got to check it out. The Ripple Effect. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Brian.
We're going to take a break, and I'm going to come back in 2 minutes with a couple of comments of my own on networking. Stay with us, everybody.